My girlfriend said, "I know you're just faking your illness," and hid my asthma medication. I ended up in the hospital, we pressed charges, and she ended up in prison. My name is Yvonne, I'm 26 years old, and I've lived with asthma since I was a child. It's not something new, it's not something I made up. In fact, between the ages of 8 and 13 I spent several long stretches in hospital because of severe attacks. Over time I improved a lot, I took great care of myself and learned to manage the triggers. For almost a decade my symptoms stayed under control, with only a few isolated episodes that never went beyond a simple puff of the inhalator. For more than 2 years I had a stable relationship with Coral, my 24-year-old girlfriend. I always thought we were a solid couple. We understood each other, made plans together, and even talked about moving in together soon. She was affectionate, attentive, someone I felt I could talk to about anything without fear of being judged. That's why, when my symptoms started coming back a few months ago, I never imagined it could turn into a conflict between us. The first time I felt that pressure in my chest again was on an ordinary afternoon after work. Coral was with me when it happened. I remember she got worried, helped me sit down, found my inhaler in my backpack, and stayed with me while the medicine took effect. That day she hugged me and said she was there for me, that everything was okay, and that I just had to take care of myself. Her reaction was exactly what you'd expect from someone who loves their partner. Nothing strange. Over time, however, things began to change. It all started when we began planning a trip abroad. It was one of our dreams since we met, but we'd never had the money or the time. We both worked, but our salaries weren't particularly high. Still, we'd been saving together for months. Coral was excited and constantly talked about the itinerary, the places she wanted to visit, the hotels she'd seen online. For her, that trip was a kind of celebration of our relationship. But it was precisely during that period that my attacks came back stronger. They weren't daily, but they were more frequent than before. At first Coral took it calmly, she even carried a small bag with my medication when we went out. But as the weeks passed, her attitude completely changed. It began with small comments, almost disguised as jokes. Sometimes when I used my inhaler she'd say things like, "Here we go again with that," or, "I'm sure it's more psychological than anything else. You stress too much, that's why it happens." I tried to explain that it wasn't about stress, that there were specific triggers. Cold weather, dust, intense exercise, strong smells, but she seemed to brush it off. Little by little she stopped showing empathy and started getting annoyed. I clearly remember one afternoon when we were walking through a shopping center and I felt slight discomfort. Nothing serious, but I decided to play it safe and use the inhaler. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "It looks like you're acting." That comment, even though she said it as if it were a joke, made me uncomfortable. It wasn't the kind of thing you expect to hear from your partner when you're dealing with a real health problem. Still, I tried not to make a big deal out of it, assuming it was just a bad moment or an impulsive remark. I told myself not to overreact. But the following weeks proved it wasn't an isolated comment, it was a pattern. One day, while we were going over possible trip expenses, I told her maybe we should wait a bit longer, that my attacks were worrying me because the destination involved a long flight and a lot of physical activity, and I asked her to give me time to stabilize. She looked at me with a mix of frustration and disappointment. "This is convenient, isn't it?" she said. "Convenient?" I asked. "Right when everything is almost ready, your asthma comes back. Don't you find that strange?" I didn't know what to say. I just stared at her, trying to understand if she really believed what she was implying. "Coral, do you think I'm making this up?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. I'm not saying you're inventing it, but I do think you're exaggerating. You're always fine until we talk about the trip or some expense. It's too much of a coincidence. I explained again that I had no control over my attacks, that they didn't happen because I wanted to avoid the trip. It was ridiculous. I wanted to go too, but I didn't feel safe at that moment. Coral wouldn't listen. She seemed determined to believe my symptoms were some kind of economic or emotional excuse. I tried to stay calm, but her words hurt me deeply. Still, the argument didn't escalate. She went to bed angry, and I stayed up thinking about how we'd reached that point. We were supposed to be a team. That night the temperature dropped. I felt the air grow heavier in the room. My chest slowly started tightening. It was a sensation I knew perfectly, an asthma attack building. I carefully got up so as not to wake her, opened my backpack and started looking for my inhaler. It wasn't there. I checked again, emptied the whole bag, looked in my pockets, on the nightstand in the bathroom. Nothing. I started to panic. I never misplace my inhaler. I'm extremely careful because I know what can happen if I don't have it close. I thought maybe I'd left it in the living room or kitchen. I walked through the whole house trying to keep my breathing as steady as possible. When I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket either, the anxiety shot up. I looked for it too, but it wasn't where I usually left it. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm myself while breathing with difficulty. The cold was making it worse. My hands started shaking, and I felt that pressure rising toward my throat, as if my lungs were shrinking inside. I woke Coral, barely able to speak. I can't find my inhaler or my phone. Can you help me look? She opened her eyes slowly and, instead of worrying, gave a smile I'll never forget because it was completely out of place. You didn't lose them. I hid them. It took me a few seconds to process her words. What did you say? I stammered. Yes, I hid them, she answered calmly. I wanted to prove you don't actually have anything, that it's all in your head. Let's see if you'd stop the theatrics. I didn't know what to say. A cold wave of fear ran down my spine. My breathing was getting rapidly worse. I tried to stay calm, but hearing her softly laugh while I struggled to breathe only made my anguish worse. Coral, give me the inhaler. I can't breathe. Nothing's going to happen to you, I swear. Just breathe deeply. You always make a fuss about this. Give it to me. Please. She didn't move. She lay back down as if it were all an absurd game. That was the moment I understood I was completely alone. I got up as best I could and left the house. I walked to the neighbor's door, leaning on anything I could to keep from falling. My vision was already blurry. Colors looked distorted, as if the lights had changed intensity. I heard a ringing in my ears, and every breath was a huge effort. I knocked while trying to stay upright. The neighbor opened the door, and his expression said everything. Yvonne, what's wrong? You're pale. Is it your asthma? I managed to nod. He grabbed my arm to keep me from collapsing. Wait, come inside. I'll call for help. But I knew there might not be time to wait for an ambulance. I pointed toward my house and tried to explain that my inhaler was there. The neighbor half understood but came back with me to ask Coral to hand it over. When we entered, he raised his voice politely but firmly. Coral, he can't breathe. He needs the inhaler. Where is it? She was sitting on the couch watching TV as if nothing was happening and answered with complete coldness. He's faking. Let him calm down. The neighbor turned to me in horror. Yvonne, you're turning purple. When Coral heard that, her expression instantly changed from indifference to real panic. She jumped up, ran to her bag, pulled out the inhaler, and came to me visibly nervous. Love, breathe. Here it is. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was this bad. Yvonne, look at me. Breathe. She put the inhaler in my hand, but I could no longer coordinate my breathing. My airways were too closed. My legs gave out and the world went completely dark. I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with an oxygen mask and a heart monitor beeping fast. The first thing I felt was a mix of dizziness and relief at being able to breathe again. The second was the clear memory of everything that had happened before I passed out. I turned my head to the right, looking for a familiar face, and there she was, Coral, sitting in a chair looking wrecked. She had deep dark circles, messy hair, and her hands were shaking in her lap. She was crying silently, staring at the floor. When she noticed me moving, she looked up as if startled. "Love," she whispered with a broken voice, forgive me, please. I didn't believe you. I thought you were exaggerating. I didn't know it was this serious. I didn't mean for this to happen." The words tumbled out mixed with sobs. "Please understand me. I've been stressed, depressed because the trip fell through. I didn't think straight. I'm so sorry." She covered her face, trying to hold back the tears. "Please tell them not to do anything to me." It took me several seconds to react. My mind was slow, foggy from medication and exhaustion. Tell who what? I thought. Who's going to do something to you? I asked, still trying to piece things together. She looked up. The desperation in her eyes was obvious. "Your parents," she said almost inaudibly. "Your mother called me a murderer. And your father said he'd press charges. They kicked me out of the hospital, but I came back through another door because I needed to see you. Please, Yvonne, I love you. Tell them it was just a mistake, that they should understand. I didn't do it out of malice." Before I could answer, the door burst open. My father walked in with a hard face, his voice like a verdict. "There she is." Two uniformed police officers, one man, one woman, followed him in. The atmosphere changed instantly. Coral jumped up from the chair, looking around desperately. The male officer stepped forward and spoke clearly and professionally. "Miss Coral Rodriguez, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Coral stepped back, shaking her head. No, please. Yvonne, tell them no." The officer gestured for her to turn around. Coral reacted as if she were about to be hit. She pushed them hard, screaming, "Let me go. Yvonne, do something. Tell them I'm not a criminal. Help me." The officer tried to keep her from hurting herself, but she went into full panic. She grabbed the hospital food tray from the portable table next to my bed and threw it at the officers. It crashed against the wall, utensils clattering to the floor. The officer raised his voice. "Maribel Altagracia, come in." Two female officers entered with determined expressions. Coral tried to run to the corner, but they moved quickly and professionally. In seconds they had her restrained, not violently but firmly. One held her arms, the other pinned her gently against the wall to prevent injury. Coral sobbed, screamed, and begged between gasps, completely beside herself. Yvonne, please don't let them take me. Tell them to let me go. It was just a mistake. I didn't mean it." I stayed still. I wanted to say something, but no words could erase what she had done. She had put my life at risk. If the neighbor hadn't intervened, I might not be sitting there breathing with assistance. The officers carefully cuffed her and led her out while she continued crying and pleading. Most of the hospital staff had gathered at the door. Nurses, residents, admin personnel, all watching in silence. Coral was taken out in tears, barely able to stand. When she disappeared down the corridor, the tension remained heavy. My father came to my side, his face a mix of contained fury and worry. My mother came in behind him with my two uncles and cousins. Then my older sister arrived, said nothing, just came to my bed and hugged me tightly, trembling. Feeling her hug at that moment was indescribable relief. I hadn't realized how much fear my family had gone through, but seeing them made me understand it hadn't just been my ordeal. They had lived their own nightmare while I was unconscious. My father sat at the foot of the bed and calmly explained everything that had happened. The neighbor had called 911 the moment he saw me nearly collapsed. Paramedics arrived quickly because the station was close. They gave me 2 emergency injections right there on the living room floor to try to open my airways before transporting me. According to them, for several minutes I had been on the brink of total collapse. My mother cried nonstop as she listened. My sister held my hand, stroking it gently. I just lay there, still processing how close I had come to something far worse. A couple of days passed. They kept me under observation while I regained strength and stability. During that time, Coral never showed up at the hospital again. I don't know if she would have tried. The police had her under formal investigation and a temporary restraining order had already been issued. When they finally discharged me, I felt I was regaining control of my life. Walking through the hospital corridors, even slowly, made me feel more present, more aware that I had survived. The legal process started soon after. The trial. The prosecution took the case seriously from the beginning. The initial charge they wanted was attempted murder, given the life-threatening circumstances and the fact that Coral had deliberately hidden essential medication. The prosecutor argued she acted with full awareness of my condition and had accepted the possibility that something serious could happen to me. However, as often happens, proving specific intent is difficult. Although her behavior was reckless, imprudent, and irresponsible, the legal team couldn't clearly prove she intended my death. What they could prove beyond doubt was aggravated assault, because her direct action led to my hospitalization and a severe attack that endangered my life, and domestic violence, due to the psychological abuse, deliberate neglect, and emotional manipulation she exerted by denying and withholding my medical treatment. My neighbor's statement became crucial. He described in detail how he found me, my critical condition, how he insisted Coral hand over the inhaler, and how she denied the situation, accusing me of faking. His testimony was so clear and solid that it practically sealed the case. The trial itself was painful for me, though necessary. Hearing the facts laid out, personal details of my life and relationship exposed, made me feel vulnerable. It also hurt to see her in the courtroom, makeupless, handcuffed, looking completely different from the woman I had shared 2 years with. At one point our eyes met. There was no hatred or anger in hers, only deep, shattering fear. But there was nothing I could do. She had crossed a line herself and there was no going back. The judge deliberated for several weeks. Finally, on sentencing day, I sat in the front row with my sister, mother, and father. Coral was a few meters away, flanked by guards. The attempted murder charge didn't stick, but the other 2, aggravated assault and domestic violence, did. The sentence was prison, not life, nothing exaggerated, but enough time to mark a permanent before and after in her life. When the judge finished reading, Coral broke down sobbing. Her hands shook. One of the guards took her arm to lead her out. She turned toward me. She said nothing, made no gesture, just cried. And for the first time since everything happened, I cried too. Not for her or for what we had lost, but for myself, for the terror I went through, for the vulnerability I felt, for almost losing my life at the hands of the person who was supposed to protect me. My family hugged me as she disappeared through the courtroom's metal doors. It was over. When news of Coral's arrest and sentencing broke, it spread faster than I expected. I hadn't said anything publicly, but word traveled. Neighbors talking, forwarded messages, social media groups. Within hours, hundreds of people were discussing it, some with exaggerated versions, others trying to find out how serious it really was. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. My friends called as soon as they knew I was out of hospital, and when we met I could see relief mixed with anger on their faces. They listened in silence, unusually serious. They didn't try to downplay it or justify anyone. They were simply outraged. Dylan was the first to hug me and say the important thing was that I was alive. Daniel was so tense he was clenching his fists without realizing. Joan had that look he gets when he's holding everything in. There were no recriminations or uncomfortable questions, just pure support. Some even apologized for having thought in the past that I overreacted in minor arguments with Coral. Those apologies hurt, yet at the same time made me feel they finally understood the gravity of what had happened. What I didn't expect was the reaction from her inner circle. Several people who had been friends with Coral for years wrote to me, shocked and ashamed. They admitted they'd noticed strange behavior lately, disproportionate reactions, sudden anger, mood swings they'd preferred to ignore. One very close friend confessed that when she learned about the inhaler and the attack, she felt like an unwitting accomplice for never speaking up about small red flags that now made sense. The hardest reaction to witness was her family's. Days after the sentencing, Coral's father showed up at my door unannounced. He wasn't angry or confrontational. He looked defeated, like someone who had just lost something irretrievable. I offered him a seat. It took him a few seconds to gather the courage to speak. He apologized, not as a formality but with a broken voice. He apologized for not realizing who his daughter had become in those moments, for not grasping the magnitude of what happened, for thinking it was just an exaggerated couple's fight. He said that when he saw the medical reports, the testimonies, and the prosecution's evidence, he understood he couldn't defend her, justify her, or find an explanation that softened what she did. And then he said something I still don't fully know how to process. That for him, Coral was no longer his daughter. He didn't say it with anger, but with profound pain, as someone accepting the inevitable. He said he couldn't forgive her for putting at risk the life of someone who had loved her sincerely and peacefully. He thanked me for not pushing for harsher charges and for handling everything with respect despite what I suffered. I didn't know what to say. I just sat in silence because he looked devastated. I don't know what will become of Coral when she finishes her sentence. I don't feel hatred, but I no longer feel any bond with her either. I only hope she gets the help she needs and that this prevents anyone else from going through the same thing. What I do know is that I came out the other side. Justice worked. And although this chapter was painful and humiliating, it taught me to take better care of myself and never again let anyone's doubt or ego put my life at risk. That is the real closure. A story that marked a before and after in how I see my relationships, my health, and my own worth. And although I would have preferred never to live through something like this, today I have clarity, support, and a future ahead of me.